Anime backstories, a part in a series that could make or break a character. A background that's usually used as a catalyst for who a person becomes. A lot of the times a good backstory can make us ponder and care about the person we've been watching that much more. An effective writer can get an emotional analepsis through complex foreshadowing or even emotional frame narratives. But sometimes a backstory can be so well written and multi-dimensional that you need to rewatch it several times in order to get the full picture. I think all of my favorite series have this deep dive effect where a scene has so much to unpack and really makes you think about the world in a lot of ways. But more specifically, these stories can be relatable and make you believe that there's nothing going on below the surface. But there is. What's up internet, I'm Nikando, and welcome to a series I like to call ReZero Deep Dives. Today I want to take an introspective look at how an anime backstory completely encapsulates the target audience. Life is full of surprises. Its highs are highs and its lows are lows. We as humans face both internal and external conflicts. And while getting over some of the challenges we face can be difficult, it goes without saying that our biggest struggles come from the ones that are brought about by our own selves. That being said, there is nothing more impactful when a writer decides to make a moment that completely immerses the viewer by making them feel the exact same way a character does, oftentimes through humanization and relatability. This is what I like to call character anecdotes. ReZero is built around this idea of relatable anecdotes, and I would argue that its compelling characters are the main incentive that most people would get into the show. It creates space and leverage for what the author can do with the character depending on how deep or complex they are. So it makes sense that Natsuki Subaru, a multifaceted character with multiple layers of depth, is extremely fun to watch grow. One of ReZero's most humanizing moments doesn't come from the thrill of watching Subaru suffer or its action scenes, but rather can be seen in a more slow, empathetic string of scenes of emotional dialogue. Parent and Child is one of the most eye-opening episodes in fiction in terms of understanding the poignant and cathartic moments of our main character. Because not only is this episode essential to understanding what the series is all about, it's also important for the many people who watch it as well. But before we go deeper into this episode, we need to understand a couple things. That being Subaru's design and then the stimulant for his feelings leading up to this point. One of the most important traits in Subaru that has been pointed out several times in the series has been Subaru's eyes. They're usually depicted as nasty and harsh, but this is an intentional genius choice by the writer. Natsuki Subaru's character is the perfect encapsulation of human emotion. One notable instance of this being Subaru crashing out on everyone he knows early on in the series. And before the story even starts, his eyes act as a visual foreshadow for how he truly is. So many of these components early on in the series are built around this idea that our insecurities get the better of us, and in turn how to get the better of those insecurities. And after doing both, Subaru gets the chance to revisit his old life that made him so upset to begin with. So when we see both of his parents who also mention his eyes, it raises a bunch of flags for me. It acts as another purpose. When Subaru sits down by the mountain of peas his family makes, something becomes inherently clear. Subaru was a shut-in, someone without friends, doesn't go to school, and struggles to find purpose overall. And I'm sure when some of us think about our whole lives, we can feel utterly worthless, that nothing matters in the grand scheme of things. Oftentimes it can feel like the world fails us, so in turn we fail to appreciate those around us. And it's clear to the audience that Subaru didn't realize how much his parents cared for him. When Subaru has this heart-to-heart with his father, something becomes apparent. Subaru's eyes are like his mother's for a reason. They're a reminder of someone who he can't be. When he was younger, Subaru excelled at most things like academics, sports, and primarily was successful in everything he did. And because his father was so exceptional, there was a premeditated role placed on him to do just as well. But an inadvertent role like this can completely ruin someone's mentality. His father's legacy crushed his expectations for himself, and in turn, Subaru compared himself to everyone else and lost his sense of identity. And despite Subaru's father complex relating specifically to himself, the effect that it has on his mentality is near universal. What's the point in trying if everyone else sees less of you because you can't live up to those expectations? And then you might begin to chastise yourself by thinking that my self-worth is pointless if it's not seen in the eyes of others. And a burden like this only gets exponentially worse the more you think in your own head. So it completely makes sense how Subaru got in his mentality that he's in. He doesn't see the point in trying to do pretty much anything. His efforts were wasted as he wasn't special like his father to begin with. And because Subaru knows that he can't fill the shoes that were too big for him in the first place, he can't love himself for who he himself embodies. Let's say the writer decided to make the main character who got transported to Lagunica someone like Kenichi Natsuki. He probably would have been considered a hero in the fantasy world, doing anything he wants, traveling anywhere without much struggle. But for someone like that to be the main character in ReZero would be missing the point of the entire series. Subaru Natsuki isn't Kenichi Natsuki, which is why in the first season we see Subaru act eccentric just like his father, a mask that acts as a misnomer for who he truly is. That's why Subaru gets upset when he compares himself so far off from the normal human expectation. That's why that mask he wears fails him and he's one step short from living up to someone else. We see this in effect in Subaru throughout most of the episode, where Tappei employs the use of symbolism to show us Subaru's internal struggle of depression. This is represented by a sharp stabbing pain in his head that keeps coming back. Depression is a very complicated endeavor, and when writers choose to write about it, we can assume that it comes from experience. And in this case, we see how Tappei shows the lingering effects of it. A kind of feeling that keeps creeping up on you every fleeting moment that you're supposed to be enjoying. Subaru was in pain, so much so that he would just sit there staring at the clock just to find an excuse to not go to school. And that pain just keeps coming back as he talks to his father. But everything changes when his father asks him a single question: is there a girl you like? And this ends up being the most important sentiment throughout the episode. As silly as it sounds for a question like this to cure something like depression, after Subaru ends up hearing it, his pain goes away when he thinks of Amelia. Now, I personally haven't had depression as bad as Subaru, but I'm sure a lot of us can relate to the sentiment of wanting to be better for someone else, or living up to someone's expectations because we want to, not because we were forced to. Because having someone there to be competent for helps shape us into the person we want to become. This backstory shows us the value that other people bring to us and ultimately leads to a greater message. Love is beautiful because it changes people. And despite changing himself in Season 1, Subaru still has mixed feelings on the man who he's become. We know that Subaru's parents didn't expect him to be great. In fact, they help clear the cloudy vision that Subaru had, and they act as a catalyst for a change for a much larger than life moment in Arc 6. But the emotional crux of this episode comes from when Subaru realizes who he truly is. Subaru Natsuki is Subaru Natsuki, and his mother makes him truly understand this idea. This idea that love is beautiful because it changes people takes a turn when the writer decides to apply this rule to your own self, to love yourself. When Subaru finally gets the chance to talk to his mom once again, she makes sure that Subaru can leave without a burden. When Subaru decides to mention that he's too hard on everyone else while being easy on himself, his mom sees right through this lie. It's here that we see how attentive both Subaru's parents were for him. He wasn't neglected nor pushed away. The only thing that Subaru can contextualize from seeing them again is that his outlook on life was truly wrong. And despite how far Subaru fell in this dark pit, his mom never expected any different from him, even if Subaru had failed in life. Rather, she nurtured Subaru's uniqueness in the sense that he takes after her. As the woman who gave Subaru his eyes, it makes you wonder if she had similar feelings, as she seemed to connect with Subaru on a more emotional level, which leads to his mom's final conversation with him before Subaru leaves for good. She tells him to be half as cool as his father and do your best in your own way. Even though it's fairly simple, I think this quote is a staple for what ReZero truly encompasses. The beauty in that final conversation is how it reframes Subaru's entire perspective. After all the doubt he's carried, believing that he's not good enough, that he's merely a shadow of the people around him, his mother's words lift all of it. The objective of this episode isn't to strive for perfection in your character, but rather progress. Because the truly good people around you don't see you for having a great job or if you have big muscles. Instead, they look to you for who you are as a person. The episode ends with Naoko telling Subaru to take care of himself, a saying that she's always told him, but this time Subaru actually responds, moving forward with acceptance for who he is. Time and time again in ReZero, we see that acceptance is where we can find our happiness. ReZero has never been about the pain and suffering we deserve because we're flawed, but rather because we're flawed, we deserve to live. It's a series that's an empathetic beacon for those looking for self-value and finding meaning in what they do. After all, as Naoko puts it, what matters isn't how you start or what happens in the middle, it's how it ends.